Lyotard is closely associated with discussions on the postmodern. Many books on the topic mention Lyotard and key ideas like grand narrative, paralogy, and legitimation. Lyotard introduced the concept of the postmodern in his 1979 work, The Postmodern Condition, which became influential in subsequent discussions. However, the idea had already entered his work indirectly in a prior book, Just Gaming, published in 1979. In Just Gaming, written based on conversations from 1977, Lyotard explains the difference between classicism and modernity. Interestingly, he notes in a footnote that what was called modern at that time should have been termed postmodern. This sets the stage for his more detailed exploration in the postmodern condition. In his book, The Postmodern Condition, Lyotard thoroughly examines the postmodern. To understand what Lyotard meant by the postmodern, we need to closely study this work. He continues to use this concept until the mid-90s, raising the question of whether his understanding of the postmodern evolved after 1979. So we have a twofold inquiry. How does Lyotard define the postmodern in his work, The Postmodern Condition? And does the concept undergo any changes or shifts after 1979? The Postmodern Condition is a philosophical and sociological book that aims to analyze the state of knowledge in its contemporary context. It serves as a report on the changes in knowledge forms and their validation in the most advanced countries at that time. The introduction of the book outlines 6 key points. The main focus of the book is on understanding the condition of knowledge in highly developed societies. The state of knowledge at that point of time is labeled as postmodern, implying that it views the modern era as concluded, transitioning into a modern phase. Rather than adopting the typical use of postmodern, Lyotard redefines it to address the crisis in the narratives that legitimized modernity. The modern era was characterized by science and institutions shaping social bonds, both legitimizing their activities through grand narratives. These narratives, such as the dialectics of spirit or the rational subject, are losing their credibility in the postmodern context. The breakdown of these grand narratives is evident as they lose their clear elements and disintegrate into various linguistic components, resulting in fragmented local determinism. In the postmodern era, 3 alternative legitimating criteria emerge within science. Performativity, which emphasizes efficiency and technical criteria. Consensus, achieved through open discussion associated with Habermas. And disagreement and innovation, emphasized by Lyotard himself. Lyotard questions whether it is possible to legitimize the social bond and create a just society based on the paradoxical nature of scientific activity involving disagreement and dissensus. Lyotard's project involves exploring the worlds of science and society and how they justify themselves. The key terms are science, society, the postmodern, and justification. He uses a method called language games inspired by Wittgenstein, where language is seen as various and incompatible games. He suggests that language should be understood as a series of different games with definitions tied to the practical situation in which a statement is made. Lyotard extracts 2 principles from this method. Speaking is like playing or fighting, and social bonds are made up of language moves. Now let's break down the main ideas from Lyotard's introduction. He introduces the concept of grand narratives of legitimation that justified both science and societal bonds in the modern era. Two fundamental models are identified: speculative narrative and the narrative of emancipation. The speculative narrative, originating from the founding of the Berlin University in the 19th century, aimed to unite science's development with societal usefulness based on the speculative spirit. On the other hand, the narrative of emancipation begins with individuals' need for development, emphasizing liberation from oppression. Unlike this narrative, it acknowledges a latent conflict between individuals and the state, viewing the state as an oppressor. The two models differ in their heroes' language of legitimation and goals, showcasing a contrast between knowledge pursued for its sake and knowledge aimed at empowering free individuals. The grand narratives of legitimation, which justified science and society, are no longer reliable. This loss of credibility characterizes post-industrial society and postmodern culture. Traditional explanations attribute this delegitimization to technological advancements after Second World War or the economic expansion of liberal capitalism between 1930 and 1960, as Lyotard himself acknowledges. However, he does not fully endorse these Instead, he asserts that the problem lies within the grand narratives itself, dating back to the 18th and 19th centuries, making the postmodern an inherent issue in the modern. For the speculative narrative, the problem lies in its assumption of a single science merging all branches and social structures under a uniform meta-language game, the speculative spirit. This overlooks the diverse nature of language games. On the other hand, the narrative of emancipation faces issues with its principle of autonomy, suggesting that a true description of reality alone justifies demands for change. The problem here is the assumption that different language games are easily translatable, disregarding their inherent differences. Hence, the untrustworthiness of these narratives in the postmodern era stems from their failure to respect the diverse nature and untranslatability of language games. Lyotard's understanding of the postmodern is nuanced. While he recognizes it as an ongoing issue within the modern era, he also sees it as an epoch, a distinct period. The epochal aspect is inherited from discussions on post-industrial society and postmodern culture. However, it serves as a starting point to emphasize the constitutional problem of legitimation. How the postmodern has always been present, becoming apparent as the untrustworthiness of narratives becomes increasingly evident in the 20th century. He identifies three potential criteria for legitimization in contemporary society: performativity, consensus, and paralogy. Performativity, the most dominant, focuses on achieving efficiency and increased performance in both science and social contexts. It centers around the question of utility, asking what can it be used for. In contrast, consensus and paralogy provide alternatives. Lyotard advocates for paralogy, emphasizing its significance. Paralogy challenges deterministic thinking and aligns with sciences dealing with instabilities and uncertainties. Lyotard contends that postmodern science, by exploring undecidables, conflicts with incomplete information, and pragmatic paradoxes, theorizes its evolution as discontinuous, non-rectifiable, and paradoxical. Paralogy becomes a legitimation rooted in embracing differences. Lyotard dismisses the idea of seeking refuge in grand narratives and favors little narratives over consensus as a legitimating criterion. Paralogy as an anti-model supports a dynamic system where new language games generate new ideas. The challenge lies in extending paralogy from the scientific realm to the social bond. Lyotard questions whether the principles of justice and legitimization through paralogy, suited for the scientific pragmatics, can be generalized to the social context, acknowledging the intricate nature of social pragmatics and the absence of universal rules governing all language games. The emphasis is on local consensus and justice that accommodates multiplicity and incommensurability, rather than a universal consensus. Three notable criticisms can be directed at Lyotard's work, The Postmodern Condition. First, there is a general concern about the text nature, as it often blurs the lines between describing and prescribing language games. It attempts to predict future states of knowledge and society based on true statements about these entities, causing confusion. Second, it is questioned whether Lyotard oversimplifies the distinctions between the language games he supports. This is particularly evident in the final pages of the book, where the legitimating criterion for postmodern scientific pragmatics, that is paralogy, is extended to the social. This extension seems challenging given that social pragmatics is more intricate and no universal meta-prescription is believed to govern all these diverse language games. Third, Lyotard might be seen as replacing the grand narratives of speculative spirit and emancipation with his own positive grand narrative centered on disagreement, paralogy, simplicity, and incommensurability. The concern is whether this new grand narrative might inadvertently dictate rules for all minor language games where disagreement is not the primary focus. Despite these criticisms, Lyotard's work is valued as a catalyst for discussion. It prompts essential conversations about what should be done within scientific pragmatics and the social bond, even if its status as a descriptive or prescriptive text is debated. To understand what Lyotard means by the postmodern in his work The Postmodern Condition, we encounter several interpretations, epochal and modal. First, the postmodern signifies the crisis in legitimation within the grand narratives of modernity, both as an epoch marking a new era and as a constitutional crisis within the modern. Additionally, it denotes a civilizational epoch following the modern era, characterized by breakthrough in legitimation crises and the emergence of new legitimating criteria. For example, performativity, consensus, paralogy. Lastly, the postmodern refers to a certain praxis within science and social bond, legitimized through paralogy. The term postmodern is utilized in diverse yet interconnected ways, offering multiple determinations without one fully encompassing the others. While Lyotard's use of the term might seem ambiguous, it does have limits and specific meanings as explored in the analysis. In later works, the concept does not play a central role, appearing mainly in occasional texts where Lyotard addresses its relevance or indirectly contributes to discussions about the postmodern. The term postmodern is now seen as referring to a critical endeavor within modern avant-garde culture. This includes activities in art, philosophy, science, politics, and more, where the primary objective is to explore the limits and rules within these domains. The creation of a work is based on rules that are unknown before the work is initiated. There is an aesthetic dimension introduced, emphasizing the artist's role in leading the fight for the incommunicable. A notable shift is observed in Lyotard's perspective. The basis of grand narratives, central in earlier analysis, takes a backseat, and the focus shifts to the advance of capitalism into language, leading to its invalidation. This prompts a continued effort in avant-garde work to emphasize the incommensurability of sentences. The postmodern is now viewed as an ongoing critical activity tied to the incommunicable and language's incommensurability with an added aesthetic dimension. The temporal focus is broadened, suggesting that postmodern characteristics are not exclusive to the period labeled postmodern. Lyotard suggests that postmodern elements can be traced back to figures like Freud, Bohr, Gertrude Stein, and Stern. In his work The Different, the concept of the postmodern remains equivocal. While Lyotard maintains its relevance, he avoids using the term extensively, noting its trendy associations. The grand narratives still play a role but are not the central analytical focus. Instead, Lyotard introduces the concept of genres of discourse, considering narratives as just one among several discourse genres. The postmodern in this context is simultaneously present and absent, acknowledged within the epochal context but not thematized as a central analytical concept. Lyotard's continued exploration of the postmodern reflects an evolving understanding, grappling with its various dimensions and implications. He explores the concept of postmodernity, particularly in the realms of art, literature, philosophy, and politics. He emphasizes the avant-garde's role in re-examining the assumptions inherent in modernity. Figures like Picasso, Duchamp engage in a process akin to psychoanalytic therapy, where they work through the meanings of modernity, creating an anamnesis or recollection. Their psychoanalytic perspective on the postmodern is also evident in Lyotard's later works. He contends that postmodernity involves rewriting certain features claimed by modernity, particularly its assertion of legitimacy through the Emancipation Project. He introduces the notion of perlaboration, describing the postmodern as an ongoing process within the modern, devoid of a definitive endpoint and connected to the reversible time of the psyche. This perspective marks a shift from his 1979 work, The Postmodern Condition, which mainly offered a diagnostic view of the postmodern as a specific state or condition. In the later texts, the postmodern encompasses both a state and the ongoing process of perlaboration. Lyotard's evolving understanding suggests a more active engagement with the postmodern, moving beyond a purely epochal determination. Several tendencies emerge in Lyotard's post-1979 articulations of the postmodern. Firstly, there is a broad usage of the term to denote critical activities involving the creation of a work based on unknown rules. Secondly, the postmodern is detached from a specific temporal position within modernity, encompassing sociological, aesthetic, philosophical, and political dimensions. Thirdly, there is a departure from narrative-centric perspectives, avoiding strict epochal determinations. Lastly, Lyotard views the postmodern as an ongoing, endless perlaboration of the repressed foundations of modernity. Despite these attempts to broaden and activate the postmodern concept, Lyotard often retains elements of epochal determination. His post-1979 work introduces complexity and inconclusiveness, reflecting the nuanced and multifaceted nature of the postmodern in his